The Arizona desert doesn't forgive mistakes. Not in August when the sun burns hot enough to crack leather and the only mercy comes from shadows that disappear by noon. Jack Morgan knew this truth better than most, had learned it through 20 years of riding these unforgiving lands. But on this particular morning, as his horse picked its way through the canyon pass, even he wasn't prepared for what the desert would show him. The child lay crumpled against a boulder like a broken doll, her small body barely visible among the red rocks and scattered sage. At first, Jack thought she was dead. The stillness around her held that particular quality of finality, the kind that makes even hardened men remove their hats and bow their heads. But then he saw at the faintest rise and fall of her chest, butterfly light but unmistakable. He was off his horse before conscious thought could form his boots, sliding on loose shale as he scrambled down the embankment. The girl couldn't have been more than 7, her Apache features delicate beneath the dust and dried tears. Her right leg bore the telltale puncture wounds already swollen and turning an ugly purple-black. Rattlesnake. And judging by the size of the marks and the spread of the discoloration, it had been at least an hour, maybe 2. Jesus Christ! Jack breathed his hands, already moving with practiced urgency. The old Apache tracker who taught him to read sign had also taught him this, how to draw poison from a wound when you had no choice but to try. Some called it foolish sucking venom that could kill you just as quick. But looking at this child, at her shallow breathing and blue-tinged lips, Jack knew she had minutes, not hours. He pulled his knife, sterilized it with whiskey from his flask, and made 2 small crosses over the puncture marks. The child whimpered but didn't wake, lost somewhere deep in that space between living and dying. Jack bent his head, pressed his mouth to the wound, and drew hard. The taste hit him immediately, copper and something else. Something that made his tongue go numb. He drew again, spat again, over and over until his own vision started to blur at the edges. "Stay with me, little one," he murmured between draws, though he knew she couldn't hear him. "Your mama's probably looking for you. Can't have you giving up now." The sun climbed higher, brutal in its indifference. Jack's hat had fallen off somewhere in his scramble down the rocks, and now the heat pressed against his skull like a branding iron. His injured leg, the one that never quite healed, right after Antietam screamed in protest as he crouched there, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Not when he could still feel that faint pulse beneath his fingers. When he'd drawn all he dared, Jack gathered the girl in his arms. She weighed nothing light as prairie grass, but his leg nearly buckled when he stood. 5 miles to the nearest settlement, 5 miles through hostile territory with a dying child and a leg that wanted to quit with every step. The math was simple and cruel, but Jack had never been much good at giving up. He whistled for his horse, who came reluctantly, eyes rolling at the smell of snake venom and fear. "Easy, Dusty," Jack soothed, though his own voice shook. "We got precious cargo today." Mounting with the child took 3 tries. His bad leg wouldn't hold, and he had to use a rock as a mounting block, all while keeping the girl secure against his chest. When he finally settled in the saddle, her head lolled against his shoulder, and he could feel the fever starting her skin, burning through both their clothes. "You know what my Sarah used to say?" Jack spoke to the unconscious child as they rode, partly to keep himself focused, partly because the silence felt too much like death. "She said every life saved puts a stitch in the world's torn places, helps mend what's broken. Of course, she was talking about her quilts, but I always figured it worked for people too." The horse picked up the urgency in Jack's voice, or maybe it was the way he held the reins tight but trembling. They moved faster than was safe on the rocky trail, hooves striking sparks where metal shoes met stone. Jack's leg had gone from screaming to a kind of white-hot numbness, and he could taste copper in his own mouth now, though whether from the venom or from biting his tongue against the pain he couldn't say. "My boy would have been about your age," he continued, his voice growing hoarse. "Thomas. Had his mama's eyes and my stubborn streak. Fever took him and her, both winter of '64. Sometimes I wonder why God saw fit to leave me behind, but maybe it was for this. Maybe it was so I'd be here right now when you needed someone. The settlement appeared like a mirage through the heat waves, but Jack knew better than to trust his eyes. Could be his mind playing tricks as the venom he'd swallowed worked through his system. But then he heard at the bell from the mission calling noon prayers. Real, blessedly real. Help! His voice cracked as they thundered into the dusty main street. Need a Dr. Snakebite. People scattered like chickens, but one figure moved against the tide. A woman in a worn blue dress, her long black hair braided tight, carrying a medical bag that had seen better days. She took one look at the child in Jack's arms and pointed to a building with a red cross painted on its door. Bring her. The woman commanded, her accent carrying the musical cadence of the Apache. Quickly. Jack tried to dismount, tried to be careful, but his leg finally gave out completely. He fell hard, twisting his body to protect the child, taking the full impact on his already damaged knee. The pain exploded through him like lightning, and for a moment the world went white. But his arms never loosened their grip on the girl. Strong hands pulled the child from him, and through the haze of pain Jack saw the woman's face change as she examined the wound. "You drew the poison," she said, not a question, but a statement of wonder. "You risked your life for an Apache child." "She's just a child," Jack managed before the darkness rushed up to claim him. The last thing he heard was the woman's voice, urgent and commanding, "Luna, my Luna," and then softer, filled with something that might have been awe or prophecy. "The scar. He bears the scar of the chosen." The desert had brought them together in blood and poison, in sacrifice and desperation. What it would make of them next, only the spirits knew. But as Jack Morgan slipped into unconsciousness on that dusty street, his last thought was of his Sarah's words about mending the world's torn places. One stitch, one life, one moment of grace at a time. Jack woke to the sound of singing. Not the church hymns he'd grown up with in Missouri, but something older, deeper notes that seemed to rise from the earth itself. The melody wrapped around him like smoke from a sacred fire, and for a moment he wondered if he'd finally crossed over to whatever comes after. Sarah would be there, and Thomas, and maybe his parents, who died when he was barely old enough to remember their faces. But pain has a way of anchoring a man to life, and Lord knew Jack had plenty of it. His leg throbbed in time with his heartbeat, and his mouth tasted like he'd been chewing on copper pennies. The venom. Right. The child. His eyes snapped open. "Easy, warrior." The voice belonged to the woman from the street. The warrior seemed an odd thing to call him. She sat beside his bed, grinding something in a stone bowl, her movements practiced and sure. "The poison fights inside you still. 3 days you've wrestled with it." 3 days. Jack tried to sit up, but the room spun like a drunken compass. "The girl, Luna, lives thanks to you." The woman didn't look up from her work, but something in her voice softened. "My daughter lives." The relief hit him harder than the pain. He sank back against the rough pillows, studying the woman properly for the first time. Ayanna, she'd said her name, was when the fever dreams had broken enough for introductions. She couldn't have been more than 30, but her eyes held the weight of someone who'd lived several lifetimes. Her hands, as they worked the pestle, bore the calluses of hard labor and the precise movements of trained skill. "You're a doctor," Jack observed, noting the medical instruments laid out on a cloth nearby, some familiar from his war days, others strange and carved from bone or polished stone. "I am many things," Ayanna replied. "Doctor, as your people say. Medicine woman, as mine would have said if they still claimed me. Mother to a child who forgot how to speak until you gave her back her voice." Jack's brow furrowed. "She spoke one word, paw, the first sound she's made in 3 years. Ayanna finally looked up, and Jack saw something in her face that made his chest tight, a mixture of gratitude and wonder and something else, something that looked almost like fear. "You bear the mark." She gestured to his left hand where an old scar curved like a crescent moon across his palm. Jack had gotten it as a boy catching a falling sickle in his father's barn, saving his younger brother from its blade. Nothing special about it, just another mark among many. "My grandmother spoke of it in the winter stories," Ayanna continued. "The man with the moon in his hand would come when the people needed him most, would bridge two worlds with sacrifice and suffering." She laughed, but it held no humor. "I thought it was just an old woman's rambling. The missionaries beat such stories out of us at the school, said they were devil's talk." Jack shifted uncomfortably. He'd never put much stock in prophecy or signs. Life was hard enough without adding destiny to the mix. "I'm just a man who couldn't watch a child die." Just a man. Ayanna returned to her grinding, but her lips quirked in what might have been a smile. "Just a man who rode 5 miles on a shattered knee carrying my daughter with snake venom in his blood. Just a man who fell protecting her, even as his body failed." The mission building was sparse but clean adobe walls, keeping the worst of the heat at bay. Through the window, Jack could see the town Silver Creek, they called it, though the creek had dried up years ago. It was the kind of place that sprouted up around a failed mine, survived on cattle trade and stubbornness, and served as a way station between somewhere and nowhere else. "Why aren't you with your people?" Jack asked, then immediately regretted it. The question felt too personal, too sharp. Ayanna's hand stilled. "Because I chose to save the wrong life." She looked out of the window toward the distant mountains. 4 winters ago, a cavalry unit came through our territory. Their scout, barely more than a boy, took a Comanche arrow meant for his captain. He was dying gut-shot and fevered. The soldiers left him behind said he wouldn't last the hour. She resumed her work, the grinding sound filling the silence. "I was the band's medicine woman, trained by my grandmother since I could walk. I knew herbs that could fight infection prayers, that could call spirits to aid healing. The boy, he had yellow hair like corn silk, cried for his mother in his delirium. He was maybe 17 summers." Jack waited, understanding the weight of what came next. "I saved him. Spent 3 days pulling him back from death's door. My husband understood he'd been a warrior, once knew the honor in mercy, but others in the band." Ayanna's voice hardened. "They said I'd betrayed our people by saving one of the enemy. Said the spirits would curse us for it. And then Colonel Matthews came." The name dropped like a stone into still water. The boy I'd saved had been his favorite scout. Matthews came to collect him, brought 2 companies of soldiers, found our winter camp. My husband tried to negotiate to explain we'd saved the boy, that we wanted peace. Her hands had stopped moving entirely, now knuckles white around the pestle. Matthews shot him while he held the peace pipe, shot him and 12 other warriors, said it was retaliation for attacks we hadn't made, crimes we hadn't committed. The band scattered. Those who survived, they blamed me, said my mercy had brought death to our door. Christ, Jack breathed. Your Christ had nothing to do with it, Ayanna said sharply. Just men and their appetites for blood. She took a breath, visibly collecting herself. I took Luna and ran. Came here where my skills could trade for food and shelter, where people needed a healer more than they cared about my blood. It's been 3 years. 3 years of Luna not speaking, not since she watched her father die. Jack understood trauma, understood how it could steal things from a person's voice, joy the ability to trust the world's basic kindness. He'd seen it in soldiers after particularly brutal battles, in women who'd lost everything to the war's hungry machinery. Matthews, Jack said slowly. Colonel Josiah Matthews' gray beard scar through his left eyebrow. Ayanna's head snapped up. You know him. Know of him. He mustered out same time I did after the surrender. Word was he came west, got himself appointed federal marshal for the territory. Jack's jaw tightened. Always was a bastard even during the war. Court-martialed twice for excessive force against civilians, but he had connections, always got it overturned. He's more than a marshal now, Ayanna said bitterly. Sheriff of Silver Creek Magistrate for the county, owns half the land around the dried riverbed. Says there's silver still in these hills, just waiting for the right man to find it. A knock at the door interrupted them. Ayanna rose, smoothly opened it to reveal a small figure hovering in the doorway. Luna. The child looked better than when Jack had found her, though she still moved carefully, favoring her wounded leg. Her eyes, dark and luminous, fixed on Jack with an intensity that seemed too old for her years. She walked to his bedside, reached out one small hand, and touched the scar on his palm. Then, clear as a church bell, she spoke. "Thank you." Ayanna made a sound that might have been a sob. She dropped to her knees beside her daughter, pulled her close, whispered prayers in Apache that needed no translation. Luna accepted the embrace, but kept her eyes on Jack as if he might disappear if she looked away. "The spirits returned her voice through you," Ayanna said when she could speak again. "This is no small thing. Among my people, such a debt." She paused, seemed to gather herself. "You've heard of the old ways. The life debt." Jack had heard stories from trappers and traders about Apache customs that bound people together through obligation and honor. He nodded slowly. "You saved my child. You gave her back her voice. By the laws of my grandmother's grandmother, I owe you everything. My skills, my loyalty, my life if needed." Ayanna stood, helped Luna to a chair, then faced Jack with the bearing of someone making a formal declaration. "But I need you to understand something, Jack Morgan." She'd learned his name while he was fevered, he realized, probably from the papers in his saddlebags. "I am not some Indian maiden from a dime novel, grateful and submissive. I am a woman between worlds, belonging fully to neither, surviving in both. I have skills that could help you. I know you lost your family, saw it in your fever dreams. I know you drift looking for purpose. Luna needs stability, a father figure, since hers was stolen. And you need something to fight for, besides yesterday's ghosts." Jack studied her, this remarkable woman who spoke of obligation while offering partnership. "And if Matthews finds out you're here, really finds out, then we face him together," Ayanna said simply. "Or we run together. But either way, the spirits have spoken. Luna has spoken. The choice now is yours." Outside, the sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of blood and gold. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, answered by another, then another, until the night filled with their ancient song. Jack looked at the woman and child before him, strangers bound to him by circumstance and choice, and felt something shift in his chest, like a door opening after being locked for years. "I've got a small ranch," he said finally. 15 miles north, backed up against the mountains. Bought it with my mustering out pay, but never could make myself live there. Too quiet, too empty. He met Ayanna's eyes. "Maybe it doesn't have to be." Luna smiled, then the first real smile anyone had seen from her in 3 years. It transformed her face, made her look like the child she should have been allowed to be. She reached for her mother's hand, then for Jack's, linking them together. "The spirits are not subtle," Ayanna murmured, but she didn't pull away. And so it began, not with grand gestures or passionate declarations, but with 3 damaged souls, recognizing in each other the possibility of healing. The desert had taken so much from each of them, spouse, child, voice, home, belonging. But perhaps in its harsh wisdom, it had also provided this a chance to build something new from the ruins, something stronger for having been broken, something beautiful for having been forged in suffering. Jack squeezed the small hand in his felt Ayanna's calloused fingers, strong and steady, and for the first time in years allowed himself to hope. The fever returned that night with a vengeance, as if Jack's body had been waiting for him to let his guard down. Ayanna had warned him snake venom could linger in the blood. She'd said could twist through a man's dreams and drag him places he didn't want to go. But knowing and experiencing were different beasts entirely. Jack was back in Missouri, 1864, the winter that ate everything good in his world. Sarah stood at the stove, stirring a pot of thin soup, all they had left after the raiders had come through. Confederate irregulars, they'd called themselves, though they were nothing but thieves with a cause. They'd taken the livestock, the stored grain, anything that could feed an army or a family through winter. Papa's home, Thomas's voice rang clear as a bell, though in the waking world that voice had been silent for decades. The boy ran to him barely 4 years old, all knobby knees, and his mother's smile. Jack swept him up, felt the frightening heat of fever already burning in the child's skin. "He's been poorly," Sarah said, not turning from the stove. In the dream, Jack wanted to scream at her to turn around to let him see her face one more time, but she never did. She never would. "Started yesterday. Just a cold, I think." But it wasn't just a cold. It was typhoid brought by the soldiers who'd contaminated the well spread by the war that turned neighbors into enemies and water into poison. Within a week, Thomas was delirious. Within 2 weeks, Sarah had caught it too. Jack had nursed them both, pouring water between cracked lips, singing the hymns Sarah loved, telling Thomas stories about brave knights and distant kingdoms. They died within hours of each other. Sarah first, then Thomas. As if the boy couldn't bear to let his mother go into the dark alone. Jack had buried them himself, the ground frozen so hard it took him 2 days to dig deep enough. The preacher had fled town weeks before. There was no one to say words over them except Jack, and he'd found he had no words left, only a silence that settled into his bones like winter cold. "Why didn't you save them?" The voice belonged to Ayanna now, but she stood in Sarah's place at the stove. "You saved my child. Why not your own?" "I wasn't there," Jack heard himself say, though his lips didn't move. "I was fighting a war for other men's causes while my family died alone." "No." This was Sarah's voice now, though Ayanna's face remained. "You were 20 miles away bringing medicine. You rode through a blizzard. You tried." The scene shifted, and he was in the desert again, but it was wrong, all wrong. Luna lay where he'd found her, but this time she was Thomas, and the snake that bit him was wearing Colonel Matthew's face, gray beard, and all. "Some children are meant to die," the snake Matthews hissed. "Some peoples are meant to disappear. It's the natural order, progress, manifest destiny." Jack reached for his gun, but his hand was the wrong hand, scarred, yes, but scarred in new ways. When he looked down, he saw Apache symbols carved into his palm, the crescent moon scar transformed into something alien and beautiful. "You're becoming something else," Ayanna's voice whispered from everywhere and nowhere. "Neither white nor Apache, neither past nor future. Is this what you want?" Before he could answer, the dream shattered into memory. Real memory this time. Antietam. The cornfield. Bodies stacked like cordwood, the ground so soaked with blood that men slipped in it, fell in it, drowned in it. Jack had been a sergeant then leading 12 men into hell. 3 came back, 3 out of 12, and one of those had lost his mind entirely, spent his remaining days drawing the same picture over and over, a crow picking at a dead soldier's eyes. "Is this what honor looks like?" Jack had asked his captain, standing in that field of devastation. "Honor is for rich men's sons," the captain had replied. "We just do the dying." Jack had believed in the cause, once preserving the Union, fighting against the expansion of slavery. Noble ideas that turned into gut-shot boys crying for their mothers turned into Sherman's march, and burned cities turned into his own family dying while he played soldier. The fever dream shifted again. Now he stood in an Apache camp, but he was seeing it through Ayanna's eyes, feeling it through her memories. The confusion was complete. He was himself, but not himself, experiencing her past as if it were his own. Her husband, son Walker, stood proud before Colonel Matthews. Jack could feel Ayanna's love for him, fierce and protective, could feel her pride in his attempt at peace. Son Walker held the sacred pipe, offered it with the dignity of centuries of tradition behind the gesture. "We saved your scout," Son Walker said in careful English. "My wife healed him. We want no war with you." Matthews smiled. It was the same smile Jack had seen at Antietam when the Colonel Major then had ordered the artillery to fire on the medical tents because Confederate wounded were being treated there alongside Union boys. The gunshot was impossibly loud. Son Walker looked surprised more than anything, staring at the spreading red across his chest as if it were an interesting problem to solve. He fell slowly with dignity, even in death, the peace pipe rolling from his hands to stop at Matthews' boots. "Savages don't make peace," Matthews said conversationally as if discussing the weather. "They can only be pacified." The screaming started then. Warriors scrambling for weapons, women grabbing children, and through it all 3-year-old Luna standing frozen, watching her father's blood mix with the dust, her mouth open in a scream that made no sound. Jack felt Ayanna's rage volcanic and pure, felt her reach for Son Walker's rifle, felt her sister grab her arm. "The child," her sister hissed. "Think of Luna." And so Ayanna ran carrying her silent daughter, leaving behind her husband's body, her people, her entire world. The shame of it burned like acid. The medicine woman who should have died defending her family, living instead as a refugee in the enemy's world. Jack gasped awake, his shirt soaked with sweat. Ayanna sat beside his bed, a cool cloth in her hand, her face unreadable in the lamplight. "You saw," she said. "It wasn't a question." "How?" "The fever, the venom, sometimes they open doors between minds. My grandmother said it was the spirit's way of ensuring understanding between those meant to walk together." She pressed the cloth to his forehead. "You saw my shame." "I saw your strength," Jack corrected. "Choosing your daughter over revenge. That's not shame. That's love." Ayanna's hand stilled. "Your wife and son. The typhoid. You blame yourself. Every day. And yet you saved Luna. A stranger's child. An Apache child when many would have ridden past." Jack closed his eyes. "Maybe I was trying to save Thomas. Maybe I'm always trying to save Thomas." "Maybe," Ayanna agreed. "Or maybe the spirits knew we needed each other. 3 broken people who could make something whole." Luna appeared in the doorway, a cup of water in her small hands. She moved carefully, still favoring her healing leg, and offered the cup to Jack with solemn ceremony. When he took it, she spoke, her voice rusty but determined. "Bad dreams." "Yes," Jack admitted. "Me too," Luna said. She looked at her mother. "But they're quieter now." "Since he came." Ayanna pulled her daughter close. "Tell us about the better dreams, little moon." Luna settled on the floor, crossing her legs in a way that reminded Jack painfully of Thomas. "I dream about horses," she said, each word careful but growing stronger. "A ranch with horses, mountains behind it protecting it. A garden where Mama grows the old medicines and the new vegetables. A man teaching me to ride to rope to read the weather." She looked up at Jack. "The man has a scar like the moon. He's sad, but getting better. Like me." Jack felt something crack in his chest, a wall he'd built stone by stone over years of grief. "That sounds like a good dream." "It's not a dream," Luna said, with the certainty only children possess. "It's what's coming." Ayanna stroked her daughter's hair. "The child sees true sometimes. It's a gift and a burden." She met Jack's eyes. "As is remembering." "Tell me about Son Walker," Jack said. "Not how he died, how he lived." Ayanna's face softened. "He could make anyone laugh, even the sourest elder. He carved toys for all the children, not just ours. He sang terribly, but with such joy that no one minded. He truly believed that peace was possible, that we could find a way to live alongside your people without losing ourselves. He sounds like someone worth knowing. He was. And Matthews killed him for it. Her voice hardened. Matthews is sheriff now. He doesn't know I'm here, doesn't recognize me from that day. I've changed my appearance, my name in town. But Luna. He'd recognize Luna. Perhaps. She has her father's eyes, his expressions. And if he learns she's started speaking again, if he connects it to the Apache child found dying in the desert. Ayanna didn't finish. Didn't need to. Jack understood. Matthews wasn't the type to leave loose ends, especially ones that might remember his crimes. The colonel had always been thorough in his cruelty. My ranch, Jack said suddenly. It's isolated backs up to Apache territory, actually. Technically, it's on the reservation border, but nobody patrols that far into the mountains. We could make a life there away from town, away from Matthews. Hide forever. No, build something. Your daughter's dream horses, gardens, mountains. It could be real. Jack sat up despite the spinning in his head. I've got money saved enough to buy stock supplies. You know medicine, I know ranching. Luna needs a place to heal, to grow strong. And when the past comes calling, it always does. Jack thought of Sarah, of Thomas, of all the ghosts that haunted his sleep. Then he thought of Luna's small hand in his, of the trust in her eyes when she'd spoken her first words. Then we face it together, he said, echoing Ayanna's earlier words. That's what families do. We're not a family, Ayanna said, but there was something in her voice that suggested she was trying to convince herself. No, Jack agreed, but we could be, if we choose it. Luna looked between them, then stood and walked to the window. Outside, the desert stretched endless and unforgiving, but the stars above it burned bright and constant. Papa told me once, she said, her voice growing stronger with each word, that stars are the spirits of all who came before watching, protecting. He said Mama would always find her way by them, and anyone who walked with her would never be lost. She turned back to them, this child who'd been silent for 3 years, who'd watched her father murdered and her world destroyed, who'd nearly died in the desert. But her eyes held hope, fragile but real. I think he sent you, she told Jack solemnly, to walk with us, to help us find our way. Jack looked at Ayanna, saw his own broken pieces reflected in her eyes, saw the possibility of something neither of them had dared hope for, not just survival, but life. Real life with laughter and tears and daily bread, and someone to share the weight when it got too heavy to carry alone. Your father sounds like a wise man, Jack said finally. He was. Luna agreed. Then, with a child's simple faith, you would have liked each other. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. In a world that had taken so much, perhaps the greatest rebellion was to build something new, to refuse to let the past have the final word. 3 souls scarred but not defeated, choosing to write a different ending to their stories. The desert wind sang through the gaps in the adobe walls, and if it sounded like ghosts or promises, well, perhaps there wasn't much difference. Both were just voices calling across time, reminding the living that love once given never truly dies. It just waits patient as stone for someone brave enough to build on it again. The morning Jack decided to leave the mission was the kind that made the desert look like God's own cathedral, crystal clear with that particular quality of light that turned the mountains purple and the sand to gold. His leg had healed enough to bear weight, though it would never be quite right again. Ayanna had done something to it with her herbs and prayers, taken the worst of the shattered bones and coaxed them into a compromise with functionality. You're a fool to travel alone, she said, watching him saddle Dusty in the mission's small courtyard. 3 weeks had passed since he'd carried Luna through the desert, 3 weeks of careful healing and cautious conversation. Got to check on my ranch, Jack replied, testing the cinch. See what shape it's in, what needs doing, before... Before what? Ayanna challenged. Before you make promises you might not keep. Jack turned to face her, saw Luna hovering in the doorway behind her mother. The child had been speaking more each day, small phrases mostly, but speaking nonetheless. Now she watched him with those two knowing eyes, waiting to see if he would be another person who left and never came back. I keep my promises, Jack said quietly, but I won't make them lightly. The ranch might be in ruins, might be claimed by squatters, might be a dozen things that make it no place for a woman and child. We're not fragile, Ayanna said, and there was steel in her voice. We've survived worse than a rundown ranch. I know. Jack swung up into the saddle, his bad leg protesting but holding. That's why I want to make sure it's worthy of you. Something shifted in Ayanna's expression. Surprise maybe, or a recognition of respect she hadn't expected. Before she could respond, the thunder of hooves announced company coming fast. Too fast for casual travelers. 3 riders burst into the courtyard, horses lathered with sweat and foam. The lead rider, a young man with sergeant's stripes on his cavalry jacket, pulled up sharp when he saw Jack. "You Jack Morgan," he demanded, breathless. "Depends who's asking. Colonel Matthews sends for you. Says you served under him at Antietam, says you'll remember what you owe him." Jack's blood went cold. He'd hoped Matthews wouldn't remember him, wouldn't connect the broken-down cowboy who'd saved an Apache child with the sergeant who'd refused a direct order all those years ago. "I don't owe Matthews anything," Jack said carefully. The sergeant's hand drifted to his sidearm. "He says different. Says you're to come now willing or otherwise. There's been Apache raids on the southern settlements. He's putting together a militia, wants men who know how to fight." "What kind of raids?" Ayanna stepped forward, and Jack saw the sergeant notice her for the first time, saw his eyes narrow as he took in her features, her bearing. "None of your concern, squaw," he spat. Jack was out of the saddle before conscious thought formed his fist, connecting with the sergeant's jaw with all the force of years of rage. The man went down hard, and suddenly there were 2 pistols pointed at Jack's chest. "Stop!" Luna's voice rang out clear and strong, and everyone froze. The child stood between the guns, and Jack, her small body trembling, but her voice steady. "Please stop." "Luna, get back," Ayanna said sharply, but the child didn't move. "No more blood," Luna said, looking directly at the sergeant who was picking himself up from the dirt. "No more killing, please." The sergeant wiped blood from his mouth, stared at the child with something between confusion and recognition. "This the Apache brat you pulled from the desert, the one the whole town's talking about. She's a child," Jack said, moving to put himself between Luna and the soldiers. "Nothing more, nothing less." "Matthews might see it different," the sergeant said, "especially given who her mama is." The words hung in the air like a loaded gun. Ayanna went very still, the kind of stillness that comes before violence or flight. "You're mistaken," she said evenly. "I'm nobody." "Maybe," the sergeant said, but his eyes said different. "Either way, Morgan comes with us. Colonel's orders." Jack looked at Ayanna, saw the fear she was trying to hide, saw Luna's small hand slip into her mother's. He couldn't leave them, not now, not with Matthews sniffing around their edges. But refusing would only bring more attention, more danger. "I'll come," he said finally, "but I come armed and I ride my own horse." The sergeant considered, then nodded. "Fair enough, but we leave now." Jack turned to Ayanna, dropped his voice low. "Take Luna and go to my ranch. North road for 10 miles, then east at the split rock that looks like a wolf's head. Follow the creek bed up into the canyon. There's a cabin sturdy, defensible. Wait for me there. And if you don't come, I'll come." "Men always say that," Ayanna said bitterly. "Right before they don't." Jack reached into his saddlebag, pulled out an oilcloth bundle. Inside was a deed, a small leather pouch of gold coins, and something else, a silver locket with a photograph of Sarah and Thomas. "Take this." He pressed it into her hands. If something happens, the ranch is yours. Legal and clear." Ayanna stared at the bundle, then at him. "Why?" "Because Luna needs a home. Because you deserve a place where Matthews can't touch you. Because—" He paused, searched for words that wouldn't come. "Because it's right." "Morgan!" the sergeant barked. "Now!" Jack mounted up, but before he could ride out, Luna ran to his horse, reached up her small hand. He bent down and she whispered something in his ear, words in Apache he didn't understand, but felt in his bones. "She says the spirits mark you for protection." Ayanna translated, her voice strange. "She says you'll come back because the story isn't finished." Jack touched the child's head gently, then straightened in the saddle. "Keep them safe." He told the desert wind, the mission bells, any power that might be listening. Then he rode out with the soldiers, not looking back, because if he did, he might not have the strength to leave. The ride to Matthews' compound took 4 hours through increasingly hostile terrain. The colonel had set himself up in an old Spanish fort, rebuilt and fortified overlooking the valley, like a watchful predator. Jack counted 20 men, at least all armed, all wearing the kind of expressions that came from too much whiskey and too little conscience. Matthews hadn't changed much, still tall, still lean, still carrying himself like God's own sword. The gray in his beard had spread, and there were new lines around his eyes, but the cruelty in them remained constant as constellation. "Sergeant Morgan," Matthews said, using Jack's old rank like a leash. "Good of you to come. Didn't feel like I had much choice, Colonel." "You always did have difficulty with that concept." Matthews poured 2 glasses of good whiskey, not the rot gut most folks may do with. "Sit. We need to discuss old debts and new opportunities." Jack remained standing. "I don't recall owing you anything." Antietam, September 17th, 1862. "I ordered you to fire on the medical tents. You refused. Should have been court-martialed, would have been if I hadn't intervened. You wanted me to shell wounded men. I wanted you to follow orders." Matthews sipped his whiskey. "But I protected you, told them you were shell-shocked, not thinking clearly. Saved your career, such as it was. And now you want payment. Now I want your expertise." Matthews moved to a map on the wall, marked with red X's. "Apache raids have been hitting the settlements. Systematic, coordinated. Someone's organizing them, someone who knows military tactics." Jack studied the map, saw immediately what Matthews was implying. These aren't raids. They're refugees trying to find food and water. You've pushed them off their lands, cut off their hunting grounds. Semantics. Matthews waved dismissively. "The governor wants them dealt with, permanently. And you're going to help me do it." "No." Matthews smiled, the expression sharp as broken glass. "I thought you might say that. Which is why I did some checking. That Apache woman at the mission calls herself Maria now, but I recognize those eyes. She's the medicine woman from the camp we pacified 3 years ago, the one who saved my scout." Jack's blood turned to ice. "Funny thing," Matthews continued, "there's still a bounty on survivors from that band. $100 a head. 300 for the medicine woman who practiced witchcraft on a white soldier. She saved his life. She corrupted his soul. Boy was never right after killed himself last winter. Left a note about Apache curses about being marked by devil worship." Matthews refilled his glass. "Of course I could be persuaded to forget I saw her. Forget about the child, too, the one who looks remarkably like that peace-talking savage I had to put down. What do you want? Your cooperation, your skills. There's an Apache stronghold in the mountains, mostly women and children, old folks. The warriors are gone, driven south by the cavalry. Easy pickings, but the terrain's tricky. You know mountains, no tactical approach. Help me clean out this nest, and I forget all about your Apache friends." Jack's hand drifted to his Colt. "And if I refuse, then I take my men to the mission tonight. The woman will hang for witchcraft. The child—" Matthews shrugged. "Indian schools always need more students to civilize, though accidents happen on the way to such places. Tragic, really. The room spun slightly, whether from rage or the old head injury Jack couldn't tell. He thought of Luna's trust, of Ayana's strength, of the promise of something better than survival. I need time to think. You have until dawn. Guard. A soldier appeared in the doorway. Escort Mr. Morgan to the guest quarters. Make sure he's comfortable. Make sure he doesn't leave. The guest quarters were a converted storage room with a barred window and a door that locked from the outside. Jack paced the small space, mind racing through possibilities, each worse than the last. He couldn't lead Matthews to innocent people, but he couldn't let him hurt Ayana and Luna either. As the sun set, painting the walls red as blood, a shadow appeared at the window. Jack tensed, then relaxed as he recognized the figure Tom Broussard, a scout he'd known during the war, a man who owed him his life from a skirmish in Virginia. Heard you were here, Tom whispered. Heard you were in a bind. Tom, what are you doing with Matthews? Surviving barely. Man's got half the territory either scared or bought. Tom glanced around nervously. Listen, I can get you out. There's a way through the centuries, but you've got to go now. He'll go after the woman and child. Already has. Sent riders to the mission an hour ago, but they were gone, Jack. Lit out this morning according to the Padre. Relief flooded through him. Ayana had listened, had taken Luna to the ranch. You sure? Sure as sunrise. Now come on before someone notices I'm gone. Tom had loosened the window bars earlier, and Jack squeezed through, dropping silently to the ground. Tom led him through the shadows, past dozed sentries, and around blind corners. At the stable, Dusty waited saddled and ready. Why, Jack asked, because you saved my life once. Because Matthews is poison. Because maybe some of us want to be better than what this territory's becoming. Tom handed him a rifle ammunition. There's more, Jack. Matthews found something in those mountains. Not silver, something else. Old Apache sacred site. He thinks there's gold hidden there, Spanish gold from the conquistadors. That's why he wants to clear out the Apaches. Why he's so focused on that particular stronghold. Gold. Always comes down to gold, doesn't it? Tom spat. Get to your ranch. Get those people safe. Matthews will figure out where you've gone eventually, but you'll have time to prepare. Jack gripped Tom's shoulder. I won't forget this. Don't get killed. That's thanks enough. Jack rode hard through the darkness, navigating by stars and instinct. The moon rose full and bright, turning the desert into a landscape of silver and shadow. He thought of Luna's words about spirits and protection, about unfinished stories. Dawn was breaking as he crested the ridge above his ranch. Below, smoke rose from the chimney, not the black smoke of destruction, but the gray curl of a morning fire. He could see figures in the yard, Ayana hanging laundry, Luna feeding chickens he didn't remember owning. They'd made it. They were safe. For now. As he rode down the slope, Luna spotted him first. Her cry brought Ayana running, and Jack saw something in her face he hadn't expected. Not just relief, but joy. Quickly hidden, but unmistakably there. You came back, Luna said, running to meet him as he dismounted. I promised I would. Men promise a lot of things, Ayana said, but her eyes were warm. Matthews knows who you are, Jack said. We've got maybe 3 days before he figures out where we are. Then we'd better make ready, Ayana said simply. This is our home now, our stand. Jack looked at them, this woman who'd lost everything but kept fighting, this child who'd found her voice in trauma's aftermath and felt that shift again, stronger now. Not just duty or obligation, but something deeper, something that felt like roots growing after years of drifting. Our stand, he agreed. Luna slipped her hand into his, her other hand reaching for her mother. They stood there, 3 people bound by circumstance and choice, facing a future uncertain, but no longer alone. The story, as Luna had said, wasn't finished. In fact, it had just begun. The ranch looked different in the morning light than Jack remembered. Maybe it was seeing it through Ayana's eyes as she surveyed the property with the calculating gaze of someone measuring survival odds. Or Maybe it was Luna running through the yard with a joy he hadn't thought to see there chasing chickens that had apparently materialized from nowhere along with a milk cow and 2 goats. Where did the livestock come from? Jack asked, still trying to reconcile the ranch he'd abandoned with this somehow living version of it. Trade, Ayanna said simply. I had medicines the local ranchers needed. Their animals had fever. I helped. They paid in what they could spare. In one day, I work fast when motivated. She turned to face him fully. We need to talk about what comes next. Matthews will come, you said 3 days. That's not enough time to run not with Luna still healing. So we fight or we negotiate. Matthews doesn't negotiate, he takes. Then we fight. The simplicity of it should have been absurd. 1 broken-down cowboy, an Apache woman, and a 7-year-old child against Matthews and his private army. But looking at Ayanna at the steel in her spine and the fire in her eyes, Jack thought maybe absurd was just another word for necessary. There's something else, Jack said. Tom Broussard, the scout who helped me escape, he said Matthews is after more than just clearing Apaches. There's a sacred site in the mountains. He thinks there's Spanish gold hidden there. Ayanna went very still. The Cave of First Light. You know it. Every Apache knows it. It's where the world began, where the first people emerged from darkness into day. It's the most sacred place of my mother's people. Her voice dropped. And yes, there's gold, not Spanish, older. Sacred offerings from centuries of ceremonies. Matthews cannot have it. He will unless we stop him. Ayanna, studied him. Yesterday you were a stranger who saved my daughter. Today you speak of we, as if we're what bound? The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. Jack thought of the deed he'd given her, of Luna's hand in his, of the way this empty ranch suddenly felt like it could be something more. Maybe we should be, he said quietly. Ayanna's eyes widened. You don't know what you're saying. I know Matthews will come whether we're together or apart. I know Luna needs stability protection. I know you need a legal claim to this land that even Matthews can't challenge. He paused, gathered courage, and I know I'm tired of being alone. So this is practicality, a business arrangement. No. Jack removed his hat, ran his hand through his hair. I mean, yes, there's practical reasons, but also... He looked at her. Really looked at her, this remarkable woman who'd survived massacre and exile, who'd kept her daughter safe and sane against all odds, who looked at him not as savior, but as equal. Also, I think maybe the spirits Luna talks about know what they're doing. Ayanna was quiet for a long moment then. In my culture, marriage is not just between 2 people. It's between families, clans, histories. You would be taking on not just me and Luna, but all the ghosts we carry. I've got plenty of my own ghosts. Maybe they'll keep each other company. Despite everything, Ayanna smiled. It transformed her face, made her look younger, made her look like someone who might once have laughed easily before the world taught her otherwise. You're serious, she said. Dead serious. There's a judge in Millfield, 20 miles north. Might not be traditional Apache way, but it would be legal. Give you and Luna protection under white law. And you, what would it give you? Jack thought about it, about the empty years since Sarah and Thomas, about the drift from place to place, job to job, never settling, never belonging. Purpose, he said finally. Family. A reason to fight. That's about more than just survival. Luna appeared around the corner of the cabin carrying eggs in her apron. She looked between them with those 2 knowing eyes. Are you getting married? She asked matter-of-fact as only children can be. Luna, Ayanna's cheeks darkened. The spirit said you would. Luna continued unperturbed. Last night in my dream, they said the man with the moon-marked hand and the woman who walks between worlds would stand together. They said I would have a father again. Jack knelt down to Luna's level. Would you want that me as a father? Luna considered seriously. You saved me. You came back when you said you would. You don't look at Mama like she's less than human. You have sad eyes but kind hands." She nodded decisively. "Yes." "It's not that simple," Ayanna protested. "Why?" Luna asked. "Because he's white, because we're Apache, because the town will talk. All of those reasons. But none of them matter if Matthews kills us," Luna said with brutal child logic. "And none of them matter if we're happy." Jack faced Ayanna again. "She's right. None of it matters except what we choose. And I choose this Luna, this ranch, this stand. The question is, what do you choose?" Ayanna looked at her daughter, at Jack, at the ranch spread out before them, humble but solid, empty, but waiting to be filled. The morning sun climbed higher, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold. "In the old way," she said slowly, "there would be ceremonies, negotiations between families, rituals to bind not just bodies, but spirits. We don't have time for the old way." "No." She took a breath. "But we can make a new way, blend both traditions. Will this judge marry us if we're Apache?" "Judge Thornton's fair. Lost his own son to the war, has no love for Matthews. He'll do it." "Then we go today. Now. Before I remember all the reasons this is insane." They packed quickly, loading the wagon with supplies and Luna safely in the back. The ride to Millfield took 4 hours, and they spent it in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Luna sang softly in Apache old songs her father had taught her, and Jack found the melody oddly soothing. Millfield was larger than Silver Creek, a proper town with a main street and pretensions to civilization. People stared as they rode in. A white man, an Apache woman, and a mixed child were not common sights together, except in contexts of violence or servitude. But Jack kept his eyes forward, and Ayanna held her head high, and Luna waved at anyone who looked kind. Judge Thornton's office occupied the second floor of the courthouse, a brick building that looked solid enough to withstand siege. The judge himself was a small man with enormous whiskers and eyes that had seen too much. "Jack Morgan," he said when they entered. "Heard you were back in the territory." "Judge, we need a marriage performed." Thornton's eyebrows rose as he took in Ayanna and Luna. "This is unusual. These are unusual times. Matthews know about this." "Matthews is why we're doing it," Jack said bluntly. "This woman and her daughter need legal protection. I'm offering it." "Just protection." Thornton studied them shrewdly. "Nothing else." Ayanna stepped forward. "Respect, partnership, a future for my daughter. Is that enough for your law?" "My dear woman, I've married people for far less noble reasons." Thornton pulled out his book of ceremonies. "You understand this will make you a target. Both of you Matthews doesn't like his perceived order disturbed." "We're already targets," Jack said. "Fair point." Thornton stood, adjusted his robes. "Well, then let's make history. I'll need witnesses." "I'll witness." The voice came from the doorway. Tom Broussard stood there, dust-covered and grim. "Rode hard to find you. Matthews is moving faster than expected. He's got 40 men heading for the Apache stronghold tomorrow dawn." Jack gripped his friend's shoulder. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did. Someone needs to stand for something better than what we've become." Tom looked at Ayanna, removed his hat. "Ma'am, your husband was a good man. I was there that day, wanted to stop. It was too much a coward to try. Let me do this at least." Ayanna studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "You're here now. That matters." "I'll witness too." An elderly Mexican woman stepped forward from where she'd been filing papers. "Maria Sandoval, I've seen too many families torn apart by men like Matthews. Good to see one being made despite him." Judge Thornton cleared his throat. "Well then, Jack Morgan, do you take this woman?" "What's your Christian name, my dear?" "I don't have one. My name is Ayanna." "Do you take Ayanna to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and hold in sickness and health, for richer or poor, as long as you both shall live?" Jack looked at Ayanna, saw his future in her eyes, complicated, dangerous but real. I do. Ayanna, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, accepting the protection of his name and law, sharing his burdens and his blessings, as long as you both shall live? Ayanna hesitated, and Jack saw the war in her pride against pragmatism past, against future. Then Luna slipped her small hand into her mother's, and the war ended. I do, she said clearly. The rings. We don't. Jack started, but Luna interrupted. Here. She pulled two objects from her pocket. One was a ring of braided horsehair, intricate and strong. The other was Jack's own mother's ring, the one he'd carried in his saddlebags since the war, unable to bury it with Sarah, unable to let it go. How did you— The spirit said to bring them, Luna said simply. They exchanged the ring's horsehair for gold Apache tradition, for American binding themselves in both worlds. By the power vested in me, by the territory of Arizona and the United States of America, I pronounce you husband and wife. Thornton paused. There's supposed to be a kiss here. Jack and Ayanna looked at each other, suddenly awkward. They'd agreed to this for survival, for protection. But now, standing here with witnesses and law and ceremony, it felt like more. Ayanna stepped closer, raised her hand to Jack's scarred cheek. In my tradition, she said softly, a marriage begins with truth. She leaned in, her lips barely brushing his. The truth is, I'm terrified. Me too, Jack whispered back, then kissed her properly gently, a promise more than passion. Luna clapped, Tom whooped, Maria wiped her eyes, and Judge Thornton stamped the certificate with more force than necessary. It's done then, the judge said. Legal and binding. God help you both. They were walking back to the wagon when the shot rang out. Jack moved instinctively, pulling Ayanna and Luna behind a water trough as wood splintered where they'd been standing. Matthews says congratulations, a voice called out. 3 of Matthew's men stood at the end of the street, rifles raised. Says to tell you he'll see you real soon. You and your squaw and the half-breed brat. Tom had his pistol out, but Jack put a hand on his arm. Not here, not with Luna watching. Smart man, the lead gunman said. Enjoy your wedding night, Morgan. Might be your last. They backed away, laughing, and Jack felt Ayanna trembling beside him. Not with fear, but with rage. Let them go, he said quietly. We know where we stand now. They threatened Luna, and they'll regret it, but not here, not now. We're better than they are. We have to be. They made it back to the ranch as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of blood and promise. Luna had fallen asleep in the wagon, exhausted by the day's emotions. Jack carried her inside, laid her in the small bed Ayanna had made up with quilts that appeared from the same mysterious source as the chickens. When he came back outside, Ayanna stood by the fence, staring at the mountains that held her people's sacred places. What have we done? She asked. What we had to. Is that enough? When the killing starts, when Luna sees more death, will necessity be enough? Jack stood beside her, not touching, but close enough to feel her warmth. I don't know, but I know she has a chance now. Legal protection, a father's name, a defended home. That's more than she had yesterday. And us. Ayanna turned to face him. What do we have? Jack thought about it, about the strange path that had led them here. A beginning, he said finally. Whatever else we are, we're family now. In law, if nothing else. The law, Ayanna said bitterly. White man's law that says I'm property now. No. Jack's voice was firm. The law says you're protected, but between us, you're my partner. Equal. Always. She studied him in the dying light. You mean that? I mean it. Then we'd better prepare for war, because Matthews won't let this stand. No. Jack agreed. He won't. They stood together as darkness fell, 2 people bound by ceremony and circumstance, facing a future that promised blood and fire, but also perhaps something more. Something worth fighting for. Inside the cabin, Luna stirred in her sleep, murmured something in Apache that sounded like a prayer or a promise. And overhead, the stars emerged one by one, ancestors watching spirits gathering, bearing witness to what would come. The first week of marriage was nothing like the dime novels Sarah used to hide under her sewing basket. There were no stolen glances over candlelit dinners, no passionate embraces in the moonlight. Instead, there was work, endless, back-breaking, necessary work that started before dawn and ended long after sunset. Jack woke that first morning to find Ayanna already up grinding corn in the old stone metate she'd somehow procured Luna beside her, learning the ancient rhythm. The sight stopped him cold, not because it was strange, but because it was so unexpectedly right. The empty kitchen that had echoed with ghosts for 3 years, now filled with purpose, with the soft scrape of stone on stone, and Luna's careful questions about measurements and meaning. "Coffee's on the stove," Ayanna said without looking up. "Breakfast will be ready soon." It was such a simple thing, coffee waiting, breakfast coming, but Jack had to turn away to compose himself. Years of solitary mornings of cold biscuits and bitter coffee drunk standing up of silence where there should have been conversation, all of it crumbling under the weight of this new reality. "We need to fortify," he said when he could trust his voice. "Matthews gave us 3 days. We are down to 2. Then we'd better work fast." Ayanna stood dusting cornmeal from her hands. "I've been thinking. The canyon behind the ranch, it's narrow. Yes, barely wide enough for a wagon. Good, we can block it, partially funnel any attackers. And the well, it's inside the courtyard walls. Such as they are, walls are mostly fallen down. Then we rebuild them. Luna, go gather the eggs and check on the goats." The child scampered off, and Ayanna moved to the window, studying the terrain with a tactical eye that surprised Jack. "You've done this before," he said. "Defended a position 3 times. Once against Mexican raiders, once against Comanche, once against soldiers." Her voice was matter-of-fact. "We held twice. And the third was Matthews." They worked in companionable silence for a while, planning defenses, listing supplies needed. It was easier than addressing the elephant in the room, the fact that they were now married, legally bound, sharing a home, but still essentially strangers. Tom Broussard arrived mid-morning with 2 other men, former soldiers, who'd grown sick of Matthew's version of law and order. One was a former slave named Samuel Washington, who joined the Union Army and stayed west after the war. The other was Irish Mike O'Sullivan, a demolitions expert who'd lost 3 fingers to his craft, but none of his enthusiasm for it. "Heard you got yourself hitched," Irish Mike said, grinning. To an Apache, no less. "Matthews is frothing like a rabid dog." "Good," Jack said. "Angry men make mistakes." "This one's got 40 guns," Samuel pointed out. "How many mistakes can he afford?" "We don't need to defeat him," Ayanna said, joining them. She changed into work clothes, men's pants, and a loose shirt that didn't hide her femininity but freed her for labor. "We need to make attacking us too costly. Matthews is a businessman at heart. If the price gets too high, he'll look for easier targets." "You've got a strategist for a wife," Tom said approvingly. "Though I wonder if you know about the sacred cave." "Yes." Ayanna's voice was steel. "And he cannot have it." They spent the day building. The old wall around the courtyard had been built by Spanish missionaries a century ago, solid stonework that had crumbled from neglect more than design flaw. They hauled rocks from the creek bed, mixed mortar from clay, and straw raised the wall inch by inch. Luna helped her small hands carrying pebbles to fill gaps, her voice bright as she chattered to whoever would listen. "Papa Jack," she said at one point, and Jack nearly dropped the stone he was lifting. "Is that right, Papa Jack?" He looked at Ayanna, who was watching him carefully. "If you want," he managed. "I want," Luna said decisively and went back to her work, as if she hadn't just rearranged Jack's entire understanding of himself. By evening, they'd raised the wall to chest height along the front approach. Not enough to stop determined attackers, but enough to give defenders cover. Irish Mike had rigged some interesting surprises along the approach road. Nothing fatal, he assured Ayanna when she expressed concern about killing unnecessarily, but enough to make attackers think twice. As the sun set, the workers gathered for dinner. Ayanna had somehow made a feast from limited supplies: rabbit stew rich with wild herbs, cornbread with precious honey beans seasoned with chilies that made the eyes water and the soul warm. They ate outside under stars that seemed closer here than anywhere else Jack had been. "Tell us a story, Mama," Luna requested, and Ayanna obliged, sharing a tale of coyote and rabbit, how cleverness could defeat strength. Her voice rose and fell with the rhythm of ancient telling, and even the hardened soldiers listened like children. When the others had left and Luna was asleep, Jack and Ayanna found themselves alone by the dying fire. The question of sleeping arrangements hung between them, unspoken, but heavy. "I'll take the barn," Jack offered. "That's foolish. You need proper rest if we're to defend this place." Ayanna stared into the flames. "We're married. We can share a roof without expectations." "I don't want you to feel—" "I feel tired," she interrupted. "I feel worried about tomorrow. I feel grateful for your help and your friends. What I don't feel is obligated to perform any wifely duties beyond what I choose." She looked at him, then direct and challenging. "Can you accept that?" "Yes." "Then come inside. There are 2 beds. We're adults. We can manage." The cabin had 2 rooms, the main room with kitchen and living space, and a smaller room with 2 beds, one where Luna slept and another larger one that had been Jack's on his rare visits. Ayanna had hung a blanket between the beds for privacy. Jack lay in the darkness, hyper-aware of every sound: Ayanna's quiet breathing, Luna's occasional murmur, the setting of the house. It had been years since he'd shared sleeping space with anyone, and the intimacy of it, even separated by blanket and propriety, was both foreign and achingly familiar. "Jack." Ayanna's voice was soft in the darkness. "Yeah, thank you. For this chance. For not being what I expected." "What did you expect?" A pause. "Ownership. Demands. The kind of man who sees an Apache woman as less than human useful only for what she can provide. That's not who I am." "I'm beginning to see that." Another pause. "Tell me about Sarah." Jack's throat tightened. "Why, because she shaped you. Because Luna needs to know the whole of her new father, not just the parts you show. Because in the dark, sometimes truth comes easier." So he told her about meeting Sarah at a church social, her laugh that filled rooms, her stubborn insistence on teaching Thomas letters before he could properly walk, about the farm before the war, green and growing, full of promise, about coming home to death, about the silence after. "She sounds wonderful," Ayanna said when he finished. "She was. I would have liked her, I think." "You would have. She had your strength, your way of making broken things whole." "I don't make anything whole," Ayanna said softly. "I just refuse to let things stay broken." "Maybe that's the same thing." They fell quiet, and soon Ayanna's breathing deepened into sleep. But Jack lay awake, thinking about the strange turns of life, how loss could lead to unexpected gains, how a dying child in the desert could become the bridge to a new family. The second day brought new challenges. A rider came at noon, not one of Matthew's men, but a Apache warrior, young and fierce, who spoke rapid Apache to Ayanna while eyeing Jack with deep suspicion. "My cousin," Ayanna explained after the warrior left. "He says the elders know of our marriage. They're divided. Some say I've betrayed our people again. Others say the spirits work in mysterious ways." "And what do you say?" "I say survival makes its own rules." She paused. "He also brings warning. Matthews has recruited some Comanche scouts, enemies of my people. They know the land better than his soldiers." "How many?" "5, maybe 6, led by one called Scar Eye." Jack knew the name. Scar Eye had worked for the army tracking Apache bands for removal. He was good at his job, ruthless in its execution. This changes things, Jack said. Yes, we need watchers. Luna. The girl appeared as if from air, a skill that unsettled and impressed Jack equally. You remember the bird calls Father taught you? Luna nodded solemnly. If you see riders coming, any riders, you make the morning dove call 3 times. Then you hide in the root cellar no matter what. Yes, Mama. They spent the day on preparations, filling water barrels, preparing medical supplies, cleaning weapons. Ayana worked with quiet efficiency, and Jack saw more of her past in every movement. She'd been trained as a medicine woman, yes, but also as a survivor in a world that offered her people no quarter. That evening, as they ate a simple meal of beans and tortillas, Luna asked, "Will people die tomorrow?" Jack and Ayana exchanged glances. Maybe. Ayana said honestly, "We'll try to prevent it, but sometimes violence comes whether we want it or not." "I don't want Papa Jack to die," Luna said, her voice small. "Or you, Mama, or the chickens." "The chickens will be fine," Jack said, trying for levity. "We'll put them in the root cellar with you." "Promise, promise." Luna seemed satisfied with this, but later, as Jack tucked her in, she grabbed his hand. "The spirits are worried," she whispered. "They say tomorrow brings choosing. Choosing who we become." That night, Jack and Ayana sat up late going over plans, contingencies, fallback positions. The moon was new, leaving the desert dark as pitch beyond the circle of lamplight. "If something happens to me," Jack started, but Ayana cut him off. "Nothing will happen. We'll survive. All of us. But if—" "No." Her voice was fierce. "We don't speak death into being. We speak life, resistance, future. That's not practical. Practical is for people with choices. We have none, so we have faith instead." She stood abruptly, moved to the door. "I need to prepare some things. Medicine things. Apache things." "Can I help?" She looked at him for a long moment. "Yes." They went outside where she had laid out various plants and stones and patterns that meant nothing to Jack, but clearly held significance for her. She began to sing low and rhythmic as she worked. She painted symbols on flat stones with a mixture that smelled of sage and something else, something older than memory. "Protection," she explained, "for the house, the land, the people who defend it." "Does it work?" "It works if we believe it works. Faith and gunpowder spirit and strategy. We need both." She painted a symbol on his hand over the moon scar. The paint tingled, or maybe that was imagination. "What does it mean, chosen protector?" "It tells the spirits you fight for more than yourself." "I am. I know." She painted a matching symbol on her own hand. "Partners." They stood there in the darkness, hands marked with ancient protection, facing a modern threat. The contradictions should have been absurd, but instead felt profound. "Ayana." Jack started, not sure what he wanted to say, but knowing something needed saying. "Tomorrow," she said. "Whatever words you have, save them for tomorrow. Tonight, we prepare. Tomorrow, we survive. After that," she shrugged. "After that, we'll see who we've become." They went back inside where Luna slept peacefully, despite the danger creeping closer with every hour. Jack checked his rifle. His pistol counted ammunition. Ayana packed medical supplies, prepared poultices and bandages. They worked in companionable silence, 2 people preparing for war with the efficiency of long practice. When there was nothing left to prepare, they sat at the table, sharing a pot of coffee that neither needed but both wanted. "I'm glad," Ayana said suddenly. "About what?" "That if I must face Matthews again, I don't face him alone. That Luna has someone else to protect her. That—" She paused, seemed to gather courage. "That I married a man who sees me as a person, not a possession or a curiosity." "You're more than a person," Jack said without thinking. "You're a force of nature." She smiled, then a real smile that transformed her face. "Flattery husband, truth wife." The words hung between them, husband and wife. Still new, still strange, but gaining weight with each passing hour. A coyote howled in the distance, answered by another, then another. But these weren't coyotes, Jack realized. These were signals. Human signals. "They're scouting," Ayanna said, her smile fading. "Testing our response." Jack stood, grabbed his rifle. "Then let's give them something to report." He fired 3 shots into the air, evenly spaced, controlled. A message of its own. "We're here, we're ready, we're not afraid." The howling stopped. "They'll come at dawn," Ayanna said with certainty. "Then we'd better get some sleep." But neither moved. They sat there, 2 people bound by necessity and growing into something more, waiting for the dawn that would test everything they'd built. "Whatever happens," Jack said finally, "I want you to know this week, building this being part of something again. It's given me back something I thought was dead." "What?" "Hope." Ayanna reached across the table, took his hand, the one marked with protection, the one scarred by the past. "Hope is dangerous in this world. Everything worthwhile is." She squeezed his hand once, then stood. "Dawn comes early. We should rest." They went to their separate beds, but the connection remained 2 people no longer alone facing whatever came together. Outside, the desert held its breath, waiting for the violence morning would bring. But inside the small cabin, there was peace of a sort, the peace that comes from finding your ground and choosing to defend it, from building something worth protecting, from discovering that even in the darkest places, hope could take root and grow. The first harvest of their strange marriage was trust, fragile but real. Tomorrow would test it. Tomorrow would test everything. But tonight, for these last few hours, they were simply a family, sleeping under the same roof, protected by ancient symbols and modern ammunition, by faith and determination, by the choice to stand together rather than fall alone. It was, Jack thought, as sleep finally claimed him more than he'd dared dream, and exactly what he'd needed. Tomorrow would bring what it brought, but tonight he was home. Dawn came like a whisper, not the violence they'd expected. Jack woke to find Tom Broussard at the door, dust-covered and grim. "Matthews pulled back," Tom said, accepting the coffee Ayanna offered. Something spooked him in the night. His Comanche scouts found something, wouldn't say what, but they refused to attack at dawn, said the spirits were against it. Ayanna and Jack exchanged glances. The protection symbols the prayers had, they actually worked. "He's regrouping," Tom continued. "But here's the interesting part. Your marriage has stirred up the whole territory. There's folks riding in from all over wanting to see the white man who married an Apache, wanting to know what it means." "What does it mean?" Jack asked. "Maybe that things can change," Tom said. "Maybe that Matthews doesn't speak for everyone." Within hours, they started arriving. First came the Mexicans from the valley, 3 families who'd been burned out by Matthews' land grabs looking for somewhere to make a stand. Then 2 Apache women cast out from their band for marrying Mexican men, their mixed children beautiful and bewildered. A Chinese family who'd been driven from their laundry business in Silver Creek. A black preacher named Josiah Worth and his congregation of former slaves, all looking for land to farm and freedom to live. By noon, the ranch had transformed into something unexpected, a gathering place for all the territory's unwanted. It's displaced, it's defiant. "We don't have food for all these people," Jack muttered to Ayanna, watching Luna play with children who spoke 3 different languages. "We'll manage," Ayanna said. "Look at them, Jack. They're not here for food. They're here for hope." Old Maria Sandoval, who'd witnessed their wedding, arrived with a wagon full of supplies. "From those in town who support you but can't say so openly," she explained. "Matthews has eyes everywhere, but not everyone agrees with his vision of the future." The crowd grew. By evening, nearly 50 people had gathered, setting up camps around the ranch. They brought what they could, food, ammunition, skills. The Mexican families knew masonry and helped strengthen the walls. The Chinese family contributed black powder from their mining days. The Apache women shared knowledge of the terrain, the hidden paths, the water sources Matthews wouldn't know. As the sun set, they gathered around a massive fire Irish Mike had built in the courtyard. The atmosphere was part war council, part celebration, a strange mixing of cultures that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. "Why are you all here?" Jack finally asked, standing before the assembled crowd. "You know Matthews will come. You know the danger." Josiah Worth stood, his preacher's voice carrying clearly. "Mr. Morgan, I was born into slavery, fought for my freedom in the war, came west thinking I'd find a place where the color of my skin mattered less than the strength of my back. Instead, I found Matthews and men like him building the same old world with different chains." He gestured to the gathered families. "But here, a white man marrying an Apache woman, not for conquest, but for partnership, Mexican and Chinese, and Apache and Negro working together. This is the world we want to build. If we have to fight for it, so be it." "We're not an army," Jack protested. "No," agreed Miguel Hernandez, the eldest of the Mexican patriarchs. "We're something better. We're a community." That night, they organized. Military experience was scattered throughout the group union, and Confederate veterans, Apache warriors, Mexican revolutionaries who'd fought against the French. Jack found himself commanding the strangest force he'd ever led with Ayanna as his co-strategist, using her knowledge of Apache tactics and the terrain. Luna moved through the camps like a small ambassador, translating between languages, carrying messages, her recovered voice growing stronger with each interaction. She'd appointed herself guardian of the younger children, teaching them the bird calls that would serve as warnings. "She's remarkable," said Mei Lin Chen, the Chinese matriarch, watching Luna organize a game that somehow included Apache, Mexican, Chinese, and black children all playing together. "In China, we would say she has the mandate of heaven." "She's been through too much," Ayanna said softly. "All our children have," Mei Lin replied. "But look, they play, they laugh, they forget to hate. Maybe that's the real revolution." On the second night, unexpected visitors arrived. 3 Apache warriors painted for war rode in at sunset. The camp tensed hands, moving to weapons, but Ayanna stepped forward, speaking rapid Apache. The lead warrior dismounted, and Jack recognized him, Ayanna's cousin from before, but now accompanied by 2 elders. "The council has decided," the cousin announced in accented English, clearly wanting everyone to hear. "Ayanna's marriage is recognized. More, it is blessed. The spirits have spoken through the child Luna, through the signs and portents." He looked directly at Jack. "You bear the mark. You saved the child. You stand against Matthews, who is enemy to all Apache. We will not fight your battle, but neither will we allow harm to come to this union." One of the elders stepped forward, placed a war lance in the ground before Jack. "This marks sacred ground. Any who spill blood here uninvited will answer to Apache justice." They left as suddenly as they'd come, but the impact remained. The Apache had publicly recognized the marriage, the ranch, the stand they were making. "That changes things," Tom said quietly. "Matthews can't claim he's clearing out hostiles now. Not without making enemies of every Apache band in the territory. But Matthews had resources beyond soldiers." The next morning, a rider approached under a white flag. Not a soldier, a lawyer from Tucson, sweating in his city suit. "Mr. Morgan," the lawyer said, mopping his brow, "I represent certain interests that are concerned about the current situation. My clients are prepared to make you an offer." "Not interested," Jack said flatly. $20,000. Cash. All you have to do is annul the marriage and leave the territory." The gathered crowd murmured. It was more money than most of them would see in a lifetime. "The marriage is 3 days old," the lawyer continued. "Easily annulled. The woman and child would be provided for relocated to California, perhaps where such unusual arrangements are more accepted." "Get off my land," Jack said quietly. "Mr. Morgan, be reasonable. This situation can only end badly. Colonel Matthews has the law on his side." "Matthews is the law," Josiah Worth called out. "Bought and paid for." The lawyer's face hardened. "Then you're all in rebellion against lawful authority. The consequences—" "The consequences," Ayanna interrupted, stepping forward, "are that we defend our home, our families, our right to exist as we choose." She looked magnificent in her anger, Jack thought, like an ancient goddess of war. "Tell Matthews that if he wants this land, this fight, he'll pay for every inch in blood." The lawyer retreated hastily, and the camp erupted in mixed celebration and concern. They'd thrown down the gauntlet now, no taking it back. That afternoon, more people arrived. To Jack's amazement, a contingent of Mormon settlers rode in, led by Elder Brigham Young's own son. "We know something about being persecuted for our beliefs," the younger Young said simply. "About the government deciding our way of life is wrong. We won't fight, but we'll provide medical aid food witness to what happens here." The camp was becoming a town almost overnight. Someone had started calling it Haven, and the name stuck. By the third evening, there were nearly 100 people representing every group that had been pushed to the margins of the growing American West. But not everyone was supportive. A group of Apache warriors from a different band arrived, hostile and accusing. "You bring war to sacred land," their leader spat at Ayanna in Apache, but loud enough for all to understand his meaning. "You pollute our traditions with white blood." "I survive," Ayanna replied, her voice carrying the same power. "I adapt. I find allies where our enemies expect only hatred." "You are no longer Apache. I am what I have always been, a woman who chooses her own path." She gestured to the gathered crowd. "Look around you. Apache, Mexican, Chinese, black, white, all standing together. This is power our enemies don't understand, can't fight with bullets alone." The hostile warriors left, but their visit had shaken some in the camp. That night, several families packed up, deciding the risk was too great. Jack couldn't blame them. They had children to think of, futures to protect. But more stayed than left. As the fire burned low, they shared stories, food songs from their various traditions. Luna sat in the middle of it, all translating, connecting her small voice, building bridges between worlds. "She's going to be something special," Sam Washington said, watching Luna teach African-American children an Apache counting song, while Mexican children taught her Spanish words for the stars. "She already is," Jack replied. Later in the quiet of their cabin, while Luna slept, Jack and Ayanna finally had a moment alone. The weight of the last days showed in the slump of her shoulders, the tired lines around her eyes. "We've started something we can't control," she said. "Are you sorry?" She considered. "No. But I'm frightened. All these people looking to us for leadership, for hope. What if we fail them? Then we fail fighting for something worthwhile." Jack hesitated, then sat beside her on the rough bench. "Sarah used to say that the measure of a life wasn't in its length, but in its depth. In what we stand for when standing is hard." She was wise. She would have loved this. All of it. The chaos, the community, the absolute insanity of what we're trying to build. Ayanna smiled slightly. A town of misfits and outcasts standing against the powerful. It's almost biblical. Or mythological. Coyote would approve. They sat in comfortable silence, shoulders barely touching, watching the dying embers of the cook fire through the window. The camp outside had settled into sleep, but guards walked the perimeter, volunteers from every group working together. "Jack," Ayanna said suddenly, "what happens after? If we survive Matthews, if we win, what then? We build. Haven becomes real. A place where Luna and children like her can grow up without choosing between worlds. That's a beautiful dream. It's more than a dream now. Look outside. It's already starting." A soft knock interrupted them. Tom Broussard entered, his face grave. "Scouts report Matthews is moving. He's got 60 men now, plus those Comanche trackers. But Jack, there's more. He's got a judge's order, declaring this assembly illegal, saying we're harboring fugitives and hostiles. He can legally deputize every man in the territory to attack us. Let him come, Ayanna said fiercely. There's something else, Tom continued reluctantly. One of our scouts. He says Matthews has artillery, a mountain howitzer from the war. If he gets that in range, the weight of it settled on them. Walls wouldn't matter against artillery. Their defensive position would become a death trap. We need to evacuate the children, Jack said immediately. No. Luna's voice came from the doorway. None of them had heard her approach. If the children leave, the heart goes out of this place. The spirits say we stand together or not at all. Luna, this isn't a child's decision, Ayanna started. I'm not just a child, Luna said with dignity beyond her years. I'm the bridge between your worlds, between all these worlds. If I run, it all falls apart. She was right, Jack realized with a chill. Luna had become the symbol of what they were building, the Apache child saved by a white man speaking for Mexican and Chinese, and black children proving that the divisions Matthews represented weren't inevitable. Then we changed the rules, Jack said suddenly. We don't wait for him to come to us. We take the fight to him on our terms. That's suicide, Tom protested. No, it's Apache tactics. Jack looked at Ayanna. Hit and run, disruption, make him chase shadows while we chip away at his force. Ayanna's eyes lit with understanding. The canyon paths, the old warrior trails. His Comanche scouts know some, but not all. Not the sacred ways. You'd share those. To protect this, she gestured to the sleeping camp. Yes. They worked through the night, planning, preparing. The various military veterans contributed their expertise, cavalry tactics, from the Buffalo Soldiers' guerrilla warfare, from the Mexican revolutionaries' sabotage techniques from the war. As dawn approached, Jack stood before the assembled fighters, 40 volunteers from every group represented in Haven. We're not trying to defeat Matthews' army, he said. We're trying to break his will, make this cost more than he's willing to pay. Some of us won't come back. But if we succeed, Haven survives. Our families survive. This dream of something better survives. For our children, someone called out. For our children, the crowd echoed. As they prepared to ride out, Ayanna caught Jack's arm. Come back, she said simply. Luna needs you. We need you. It was the closest she'd come to admitting feeling, and Jack treasured it like gold. I'll come back, he promised. We have a town to build. They rode out in the pre-dawn darkness, Apache and Mexican black and white Chinese and Irish united in purpose, if nothing else. Behind them, Haven slept defended now by those too old or young to fight by mothers and grandmothers who'd seen enough war but would see one more if it came to them. Luna stood on the wall watching them go. She raised her small hand in blessing or farewell, and Jack felt the weight of her trust like armor and burden both. The battle for Haven was about to begin, but in a larger sense, it had already been won. They'd proved that Matthew's vision of the West, divided, conquered, sorted by race and religion, wasn't the only possibility. They'd built something different, something worth defending. Now they just had to survive long enough to see it grow. The sun rose over the desert painting, the rocks red as blood red as promise. Somewhere ahead, Matthews waited with his army, his artillery, his certainty that might made right. But he'd never faced anything like this, a united front of all the people his world sought to crush. The outcome was uncertain, but the fight itself had already changed everything. Haven existed, and as long as even one person remembered what they'd built here, it would never truly die. The mountain howitzer spoke at dawn, its voice thunder in the narrow canyon, its breath smoke and death. The shell exploded against the cliff face above Jack's position, raining rock and dust on the mixed group of fighters huddled below. This was Matthew's answer to their raids of the previous night. Overwhelming force, the arithmetic of war that said bigger guns always won. "Pull back!" Jack shouted, but his voice was lost in the second explosion, this one closer, showering them with sharp fragments of stone. They'd harassed Matthew's force through the night, hitting supply wagons, spooking horses, picking off sentries. The Apache warriors had been ghosts in the darkness, the Mexican vaqueros had stampeded the cavalry's remuda, and Irish Mike had blown a critical bridge, forcing Matthews to take the longer route through Skeleton Canyon, exactly where they wanted him. But they hadn't counted on the howitzer being operational so quickly. The gun, Miguel Hernandez pointed through the smoke. The artillery piece sat on a ridge overlooking their position, protected by 20 soldiers. It could reach Haven, from there could reduce their walls to rubble, their dreams to dust. Jack's mind raced through options, each worse than the last. They were pinned down, scattered, and that damn gun owned the high ground. In his peripheral vision, he saw Ayana's cousin White Eagle signal from across the canyon. The Apache warriors were ready to charge the gun position, but it would be suicide in daylight. Another shell screamed overhead, this one falling short but close enough to shower them with dirt. How many shells did Matthews have? How long before he found the range? Jack, Sam Washington crawled over his face, grim and bleeding from a rock splinter. "We can't stay here, and we can't retreat. They'll follow us right back to Haven." The terrible calculus of command, sacrifice these 40 to save the 100 at the ranch, or risk everything on a desperate gambit. Then he heard it singing, high and clear, cutting through the chaos like a blade. Apache death songs. White Eagle and his warriors were going to charge anyway, with or without support. Covering fire, Jack roared, and every rifle they had spoke at once, trying to give the Apache warriors a chance. They came over the rocks like panthers, swift and deadly. But the soldiers around the howitzer were ready. The Gatling gun Matthews had hidden opened up its mechanical chatter, cutting through flesh and courage alike. White Eagle fell first, then 2 others, their bodies tumbling down the slope. But one warrior, young and desperate with rage, made it close enough to throw something, a bundle that Irish Mike had prepared. The explosion was smaller than the howitzer's shells, but perfectly placed. The gun barrel cracked, split, became useless metal. The warrior didn't live to see his success. The soldiers' rifles found him, and he fell beside the ruined weapon, his death song unfinished, but his purpose complete. Now, Jack led the charge while the soldiers were still reeling from the explosion. The fighting was brutal, close quarters, the kind where you could see your enemy's eyes, smell their fear, feel their last breath. Jack's revolver emptied, and he used it as a club, then grabbed a rifle from a fallen soldier, used the bayonet when the ammunition ran out. Sam Washington fought beside him deadly with a cavalry saber he'd carried since the war. Miguel and his vaqueros used lassos and knives with terrifying efficiency. The Chinese miners, who everyone had underestimated, proved devastating with their knowledge of explosives and improvised weapons. When the smoke cleared, they held the ridge. The howitzer was destroyed. 14 of Matthews' men were dead or wounded, but the cost 7 of their own, including White Eagle. "We need to move," Tom Broussard said urgently. "Matthews' main force is only minutes behind." Jack looked at the bodies, Apache, Mexican, one of the Chinese miners. Men who died for an idea for a place that had existed for less than a week. "We take them with us," he said firmly. "No one gets left behind." They fashioned travois from branches and blankets, loaded their dead and wounded. The retreat was a nightmare of narrow trails, and pursued Matthews' cavalry, pressing hard, trying to pin them against the canyon walls. It was Mei Lin Chen's knowledge that saved them. The Chinese matriarch had appeared with 5 of her people, showing them a mine shaft that connected to a parallel canyon. "From our gold-seeking days," she explained as they squeezed through the dark passages, "before Matthews drove us out." They emerged behind Matthews' lines, but the respite was temporary. The colonel had over 50 men still, and he was done with tactical games. He was marching straight for Haven. They reached the ranch as the sun peaked, finding organized chaos. The women had turned Haven into a fortress. Every possible defensive position was manned, children were secured in the root cellars and mine shaft, and Ayanna had established a field hospital in the barn. "How many?" she asked Jack, already seeing the answer in the travois. 7 dead, 12 wounded. We stopped the artillery, but Matthews is coming with everything else." She touched his face briefly, checking a cut he hadn't realized was there. "Luna's been asking for you." He found the child helping in the hospital, carrying water to the wounded with steady hands despite the tears on her face. "White Eagle?" she asked. "He died bravely, saved us all." Luna nodded, adult understanding in her child's eyes. "The spirits sing his name now." She looked up at him. "They're coming, aren't they? All of them?" "Yes." "Then we should get ready." The attack came at 3 o'clock, announced by rifle fire that shattered windows and sent splinters flying like deadly snow. Matthews had positioned his men in a semicircle, cutting off escape except through the narrow canyon behind the ranch. "Hold your fire!" Jack shouted as the defenders instinctively wanted to respond. "Wait for clear targets. Ammunition is life." The initial assault was probing, testing their defenses. Matthews sent small groups forward, trying to identify weak points. The defenders responded carefully, precisely making every shot count. Irish Mike's surprises in the approach helped Hidden Pits trip wires flash powder that spooked horses and disoriented men. But Matthews adapted quickly. He brought up wagon barriers, providing cover for his advancing men. The fighting became a deadly patience game, each side waiting for the other to make a mistake. The mistake came, but not from whom Jack expected. Luna had been helping move ammunition when she saw something others missed Scar-Eye, and 2 Comanche scouts slipping along the ridge heading for a position that would let them fire directly into the hospital. Without thinking, she ran into the open shouting a warning in Apache, Spanish, and English all at once. The scouts' rifles swung toward her small running figure. The world exploded into motion. Jack and Ayanna both moving both too far away, both watching their daughter, because that's what she'd become to him, run through a hail of bullets that kicked up dust at her feet. One shot found her. She spun, fell, her small body crumpling like paper. Luna. The scream tore from multiple throats. Ayanna abandoned all cover racing for her daughter. Jack provided covering fire, emptying his rifle at the scout's position, not caring about ammunition anymore, caring about nothing but the still form in the dust. Josiah Worth and 3 of his congregation laid down suppressing fire, while Ayanna reached Luna, scooped her up, ran back through bullets that somehow miraculously missed. In the hospital, Ayanna worked with desperate efficiency, while Jack held Luna's hand, willing his strength into her small body. The bullet had caught her shoulder, missing the lung, but causing terrible damage to such a small frame. "She needs a real doctor," Ayanna said, her voice breaking. "I can stop the bleeding, but the bone, the damage. There's no doctor for 50 miles. Then she dies." The words came out flat, emotionless, but Jack saw her hands shaking. "No." The voice came from the doorway. Elder Young stood there with a woman Jack didn't recognize. "This is Sister Ruth. She was a nurse in the Mormon battalion trained in Philadelphia before she converted. She can help." Sister Ruth moved with the efficiency of long practice, examining Luna with gentle but thorough hands. "I need boiling water, clean cloth, and someone needs to hold her still. This will hurt." For the next hour, the battle raged outside, while inside the barn, another fight took place, one for Luna's life. Jack held her upper body while Ayanna held her legs, both whispering to her in their different languages, telling her stories, begging her to stay. Sister Ruth worked with steady hands, extracting bone fragments, cleaning the wound, stitching with tiny, precise movements. Luna woke twice screaming, and each time Ayanna sang her back to unconsciousness with Apache lullabies that sounded like prayers. "Done," Sister Ruth finally said, exhausted. "Now we wait and pray." Outside, the battle had reached a stalemate. Matthews had lost 12 men to their 4, but he still had superior numbers. As night fell, he pulled back, setting up a siege perimeter. "He's going to starve us out," Tom reported. "Wait until we're weak, then finish it." "How's our water?" 3 days, maybe 4, if we ration." "Food?" "Weak at most with all these people." Jack looked at the assembled defenders, wounded, exhausted, but still defiant. They'd fought Matthews to a standstill, but victory and defeat looked increasingly similar. "We need to break the siege," Sam Washington said. "Get the children and a wounded out at least." "Through the canyon." Tom shook his head. "Matthews will have thought of that. Probably has men watching the exit." "Then we make him think we're trying something else," Jack said slowly, a plan forming. "Irish Mike, how much black powder do we have left?" "Enough for 1 good bang, maybe 2 small ones." "1 big one." "We're going to blow the dam." Everyone stared at him. The old Spanish dam 5 miles upstream held back what was left of Silver Creek's water. "That's insane," Tom said. "The flood would destroy everything in the valley, including Matthews' siege lines. And it would refill the creek, give Haven a water source again." "It would also likely kill us all," Miguel pointed out. "Not if we're ready for it. Not if we evacuate to the high ground first. Matthews would see us leaving." "Not in a sandstorm." Jack looked at Ayanna. "Your people know how to read the weather. When's the next storm coming?" She studied the sky, felt the wind. "Tomorrow afternoon, maybe evening. The spirits are restless." "Then tomorrow, we live or die together." That night, as they prepared, Jack sat with Luna. She was conscious but weak, her voice barely a whisper. "Did I do good, Papa Jack? You saved lives. You were brave." "I was scared." "Brave people usually are." She smiled slightly. "Mama says you're going to do something dangerous." "Something necessary." "Will you come back?" Jack wanted to lie to comfort her, but she deserved truth. "I'll try my hardest." "Okay." She closed her eyes, then opened them again. "Papa Jack, if something happens, will you remember me? Forever and always." "Good. Then I'll never really be gone." The sandstorm hit at 4 in the afternoon, turning the world into a brown, howling hell. Visibility dropped to feet, and Matthew's sentries were forced to hunker down, blind and miserable. Jack led 20 volunteers upstream, the strongest swimmers, the best riders. They had to reach the dam, set the charges, and get to high ground before the water reached Haven. The timing had to be perfect. Ayanna commanded the evacuation, moving people to the mesa behind the ranch, carrying what supplies they could. Luna was transported on a stretcher, Sister Ruth attending her constantly. At the dam, Irish Mike worked his magic placing charges at the structure's weak points, while Jack and the others held off a patrol that had stumbled upon them despite the storm. 5 minutes, Mike shouted over the wind. Those 5 minutes lasted forever. 2 men fell to lucky shots from the patrol. Tom Broussard took a bullet in the thigh but kept fighting. The sandstorm was both ally and enemy, concealing them but making coordination nearly impossible. "Clear out!" Mike's voice cut through everything. "She's gonna blow." They ran, rode, scrambled up the canyon walls as the charges detonated. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the sound came, a groaning, cracking thunder that dwarfed even the howitzer's voice. The dam didn't just break, it exploded. Centuries of pressure released in seconds, sending a wall of water 30 feet high, racing down the canyon. Jack watched from the ridge as the flood approached Matthew's positions. The colonel's men, already confused by the storm, had no chance. Tents, wagons, horses, and men were swept away in the torrent. The siege lines dissolved like sugar in coffee, but the water kept coming, rising, reaching for Haven itself. "Too much," Tom gasped beside him. "It's too much water." The ranch disappeared under the muddy flood. The walls they'd built, the courtyard where Luna had played all of it, vanished beneath the roiling waters. For a horrible moment, Jack thought he'd destroyed everything they'd fought to protect. Then slowly, the water began to recede. The canyon channeled most of it away, and what remained spread across the valley, soaking into the long, dry earth. When the storm cleared and the sun broke through, Silver Creek ran again, not the torrent of destruction, but a proper river, life-giving and permanent. Haven was damaged, but not destroyed. The adobe buildings had survived, though they'd need serious repair. The fields were flooded, but would be incredibly fertile when they dried. Most importantly, the people had survived. Matthew's force was scattered broken. Jack could see remnants fleeing across the desert, maybe 15 men out of 60. The colonel himself was nowhere to be seen. They found Matthew's body 2 days later, caught in the branches of a cottonwood tree 5 miles downstream. The man who'd brought so much death had met his end not in battle, but in the indifferent fury of nature itself. "It's over," Tom said, standing beside Jack as they looked at the colonel's corpse. "No," Jack corrected. "It's just beginning." The victory brought unexpected consequences. Word spread throughout the territory a mixed community had stood against Matthews and won. The governor, embarrassed by the colonel's unauthorized war and frightened by the precedent of unified resistance, quickly moved to legitimize Haven to prevent further conflicts. Judge Thornton arrived with official papers. "The territory of Arizona officially recognizes the township of Haven," he announced to the assembled crowd. "All current residents are granted full citizenship and land rights regardless of race or origin." The celebration lasted 3 days. Different traditions blended Apache ceremonies, Mexican fiestas, Chinese dragon dances, African-American spirituals, Mormon hymns. Luna, still recovering but determined to participate, was carried through it all on a decorated chair, translating laughing, bridging worlds with every word. "We did it," Ayanna said to Jack as they watched the celebration from the rebuilt porch. "We actually did it." "We survived," Jack corrected. "Now comes the hard part, living together, building something that lasts." "You're not much for celebrating, are you?" "I'm celebrating," he said, taking her hand. "Just quietly." She squeezed his fingers. "Jack, what we have this arrangement." "It doesn't have to stay an arrangement," he said carefully. "We've been through hell together. We've built something. Maybe we could build more." She was quiet for a long moment. "Luna loves you, trusts you completely. And you, I'm learning to." She turned to face him. "My heart was buried with Sunwalker. I thought it would stay buried. But watching you with Luna, seeing you fight for this place, for these people." She touched his face, tracing the scar on his cheek. "Maybe hearts can grow back. Different scarred, but functional." "I'd wait," Jack said. "However long it takes." "I know. That's why I think maybe you won't have to wait as long as we both expected." They stood together, watching their daughter conducting an impromptu choir of children from every culture represented in Haven, teaching them a song that was part Apache, part spiritual part, something entirely new. The flood had washed away the old world Matthew's world of division and dominance. In its place, watered by sacrifice and determination, something new was growing. Haven wasn't just a place anymore. It was a promise, a proof that the future didn't have to look like the past. The great crisis had passed, but its passage had transformed everything. The desert had bloomed, the creek ran clear, and on its banks a town of impossibilities thrived. Jack had lost one family to disease, and war had found another in disaster and resistance. Ayanna had lost her people's traditional world, but had helped build something unprecedented. And Luna, the bridge between worlds, sang on her voice, carrying across the water, across the differences binding them all together with threads of hope and harmony. The battle for Haven was over. The work of Haven had just begun. Spring came to Haven like a miracle that year, the desert blooming in ways the old-timers said they'd never seen. The flood that had destroyed Matthew's army had deposited rich silt across the valley, and the restored Silver Creek meant irrigation was possible for the first time in decades. What had been desperate defense became determined construction. Jack stood in what would be the new schoolhouse watching Luna teach letters to a mixed group of children. Her shoulder still pained her. He could see it in the careful way she moved, but she'd insisted on starting lessons as soon as she could stand. "Education is the real revolution, Papa Jack," she'd said with that too-adult wisdom of hers. "If all the children learn together, grow together, they won't learn to hate." She was right, of course. The children didn't see the divisions their parents carried. Apache kids helped Chinese kids with English-Mexican children taught everyone Spanish songs, and the African-American children shared stories their grandparents had carried from Africa itself. "She's remarkable," a voice said behind him. Jack turned to find Judge Thornton accompanied by a man in an expensive suit he didn't recognize. "Judge, didn't expect to see you back so soon." "This is Mr. Frederick Douglass," Thornton said, and Jack's eyes widened. "He's touring the Western Territories, writing about the conditions of freed slaves and other minorities." Douglass stepped forward, offering his hand. "Mr. Morgan, I've heard remarkable things about Haven. I had to see for myself if they were true." "Don't know about remarkable, sir. We're just trying to build something decent. A town where Apache, Mexican, Chinese, African American, and white citizens have equal rights and representation." Douglass smiled. "That's more than remarkable, Mr. Morgan. That's revolutionary." They toured Haven together, Douglass taking careful notes. The town had grown beyond the ranch now, with proper streets, laid out businesses opening. Miguel Hernandez had started a general store that served all communities. Mei Lin Chen had opened a restaurant that served Chinese-Mexican fusion that should have been strange, but was delicious. Sam Washington had established a blacksmith shop and was training apprentices from every background. "And your wife?" Douglass asked. "I understand she's established a medical practice. First integrated clinic in the territory," Jack said with pride. Ayanna had combined Apache traditional medicine with Western techniques learned from Sister Ruth and the Mormon nurses. People came from 100 miles away to be treated, not caring about her race when their children were sick. They found Ayanna in the clinic teaching a class to would-be healers, 2 Apache women, a Mexican grandmother, a Chinese herbalist, and surprisingly 3 white women from the Mormon settlement who'd overcome their prejudices in favor of knowledge. "Mrs. Morgan," Douglass said, and Ayanna looked up with that slight smile she'd started wearing more often. She'd finally gotten comfortable with the name, with what it represented. "Mr. Douglass, I've read your writings. It's an honor. The honor is mine. What you've built here, what you've survived, it gives me hope for the nation's future." That evening, the town council met. It was an unusual body elected representatives from each community with rotating leadership. This month, Josiah Worth held the gavel with Jack and Ayanna serving as advisors. "First order of business," Josiah announced. "The railroad." The room tensed. The Southern Pacific was pushing through the territory, and they wanted to route through Haven. It would bring prosperity connection to the wider world, but also challenges. "They'll bring their own law," Sam Washington warned, "their own ideas about how things should be." "But without the railroad, we remain isolated," argued Chen Wei Mei Lin's husband. "Our children need access to education, to opportunities beyond this valley." The debate went on for hours, democracy in its messiest, most vital form. In the end, they voted to allow the railroad, but with conditions. The company had to employ local workers at fair wages, respect Haven's laws about equality, and contribute to the school fund. "Think they'll accept?" Tom Broussard asked Jack afterward. Tom had become sheriff of Haven, a badge he wore with bemused pride. "They'll accept or they'll go around. Either way, we've made our stand." Later that night, Jack found Ayanna in their garden. She'd insisted on planting it corn and beans and squash in the Apache way, but also vegetables from Mexico, herbs from China plants Sister Ruth had brought from Utah. It was a living representation of Haven itself, diverse things growing together, each making the whole stronger. "Douglass wants to write about us," she said. Make us famous. That worries you. Fame brings scrutiny. Scrutiny brings people who won't like what we've built. Let them come. We've faced worse than disapproval. She smiled that full smile that had become less rare as the months passed. Listen to you, the optimist. You're rubbing off on me. Or Luna is rubbing off on both of us. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the mountains. Their marriage had evolved from necessity to partnership to something approaching love. Not the young, passionate love Jack had shared with Sarah, or the deep cultural bond Ayanna had with Sunwalker, but something uniquely theirs, built on shared struggle, mutual respect, and the slow recognition that they'd each found in the other a true equal. Jack, Ayanna said suddenly, "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the evening air like suspended stars. Jack felt his heart stop, restart race. We're... Yes. She turned to face him, uncertainty in her eyes. I wasn't sure how you'd... He kissed her properly, kissed her for the first time since their wedding, pouring into it all the words he couldn't find. When they separated, both were breathless. A child, he said wonderingly. Our child. Luna's beside herself with excitement. She says the spirits told her it would be a boy, a bridge builder like her. She knows. She knew before I did, I think. Ayanna took his hand, placed it on her still flat stomach. This child will be born into a world we've made not one forced upon us. Apache and white, raised in a town where that's not a contradiction, but a strength. The first of many, hopefully. Many, she raised an eyebrow. Many children born in Haven who don't have to choose between worlds, who can be fully themselves. That's a beautiful dream. It's not a dream anymore. Look around us. We're living it. The railroad came through 6 months later, the same week Ayanna gave birth. They named the boy Samuel Sunwalker Morgan Samuel for Sam Washington, who'd become like a brother to Jack Sunwalker for the father who died believing in peace, and Morgan to tie him to the future they were building. The birth was difficult. For hours, Jack paced outside while Sister Ruth and the Apache midwives attended Ayanna. Luna sat with him holding his hand. She's strong, Papa Jack. Stronger than anyone. I know. But you're still scared. Terrified. Good. That means you love her. Jack looked at this child who'd become his daughter in every way that mattered. When did you get so wise? When I died and came back, she said matter-of-factly. The spirits showed me things. How life is a circle. How love multiplies when shared. How families aren't just blood, but choice. When Samuel's first cry echoed through the house, the whole town seemed to exhale. Within minutes, people began arriving with gifts. Apache blessing bundles, Mexican silver coins for prosperity, Chinese red envelopes for luck, African-American quilts for warmth, Mormon preserves for sustenance. Look what we've made, Ayanna said weakly, holding their son while Jack sat beside her on the bed, Luna curled against his other side. Not just a child, but a community to raise him. Haven's story spread, helped by Douglas's writings and the railroad's connection to the wider world. Delegations came to study their system of governance, their integrated schools, their cooperative economics. Not all approved. There were editorials in Eastern papers calling them an affront to natural order, threatening visits from federal investigators. But support came too. Progressive churches sent books for the school. Former abolitionists sent funds for the clinic. Other marginalized communities sent letters asking for advice on building their own havens. One day, a familiar face appeared at Jack's door. The young cavalry scout Ayanna had saved years ago, the one whose healing had started all their troubles. "Ma'am," he said to Ayanna, removing his hat. "I heard what happened to your husband, to your people, because of me. I've come to make amends." He'd brought a wagon full of supplies and a purse of gold. "My inheritance," he explained. "I want it to go to the school for Apache children especially. It won't undo what was done, but maybe it can help build something better." Ayanna studied him for a long moment, then invited him in for tea. "Redemption isn't in the gold," she told him. "It's in the choice to be better. Stay a few days. See what we've built. Maybe you'll find what you're looking for." He stayed a week, then a month, then permanently becoming one of Haven's most dedicated teachers, working especially with children traumatized by violence, understanding their pain from his own experience. As summer turned to autumn, the town prepared for its first official harvest festival. Every culture contributed traditions: Apache blessing ceremonies, Mexican papel, picado decorations, Chinese mooncakes, African-American spirituals, Mormon organizational efficiency. The night before the festival, Jack and Ayanna walked through the town with their children, Luna racing ahead, Samuel sleeping in Ayanna's arms. The streets were lit with lanterns filled with the sounds of different languages blending into one conversation. "We did it," Jack said quietly. "We actually built something new." "We're building it," Ayanna corrected. "Every day with every choice. It's never finished." They stopped at the cemetery on the hill overlooking the town. Graves marked with crosses, Apache symbols, Chinese characters, Islamic crescents, all the ways humans honored their dead side by side. White Eagle lay there along with the others who died defending Haven. "Do you think they'd be proud?" Ayanna asked. "I think they are proud," Luna said, appearing beside them as she always did, silent as shadow when she chose. "The spirits don't leave, they just change form. Like water becoming cloud, becoming rain." She pointed to the town below, lit up like a constellation. "That's them too. Every light, every laugh, every child who doesn't learn to hate. They're in all of it." Jack picked up his daughter, getting harder now that she was growing so fast, and held his family close. Tomorrow would bring the festival, and after that, more challenges, more victories, more ordinary days of extraordinary cooperation. The railroad would bring new people, new ideas, new conflicts to resolve. But tonight, in this moment, they stood together on a hill overlooking an impossible town, a family forged from loss and hope, proof that the world could be remade one choice at a time. "Ready to go home?" Ayanna asked. "We are home," Jack replied, and meant it more than he'd ever meant anything. They walked back down the hill together toward the lights and music and future they'd fought so hard to create. Behind them, the cemetery stood peaceful under the stars, the dead resting easy, knowing their sacrifice had purchased this children playing together, families mixing freely, a town where being different wasn't a weakness, but a strength. The resolution hadn't come through force of arms, though they'd fought when necessary. It had come through the harder battle, the daily choice to see others as fully human, to build together, rather than apart, to prove that America's promise of equality could be more than words on paper. Haven stood as testament to that possibility, its very existence a rebirth of hope in a cynical world. And at its heart, a family that shouldn't exist, a broken white cowboy, an exiled Apache healer, a traumatized child who'd found her voice, and now a baby who would grow up in a world his parents had remade through sheer force of will and love. The circle was complete, but circles have no end. They just keep turning, carrying forward all who choose to be part of their motion, leaving behind only those who insist on standing still. 20 years later, Luna Morgan stood at the podium of Harvard University, the first Apache woman to graduate from their medical school. In the audience sat her parents, Jack's hair, now completely gray, Ayanna's still black but streaked with silver like lightning through a night sky. Between them, Samuel, now 19 and headed for law school, held his youngest sister, 3-year-old Sarah Small Dove Morgan. "They told me I didn't belong here." Luna began her valedictorian speech, her voice carrying the same clarity it had when she'd first spoken after 3 years of silence. "That someone like me, half Apache, raised in a town that shouldn't exist, daughter of an impossible marriage, had no place in these hallowed halls." She paused, looking directly at her family. "They were wrong. I belong everywhere and nowhere, And that is my strength. I am the bridge my parents built with their bodies, their choices, their love. The speech made national headlines. Theodore Roosevelt himself would later invite the Morgan family to the White House, wanting to understand how Haven had succeeded, where so many experiments in integration had failed. "We didn't set out to change the world," Jack told the president, uncomfortable in his formal suit, but steady in his conviction. "We just refused to accept the world as it was." But that was still months away. Today was Luna's day, and after the ceremony, the family gathered in a Boston restaurant that had reluctantly agreed to serve their mixed party. "Tell us the story again, Papa Jack," Sarah Small Dove demanded, as she always did. "How you found Luna." "You've heard it 100 times, little bird, but I like how you tell it." So Jack told it again, how he'd found a dying child in the desert, how saving her had saved him. Ayanna added her parts, the first words Luna spoke, the battle for Haven, the flood that changed everything. Samuel, who'd heard these stories all his life, chimed in with details his parents forgot or glossed over. Luna listened with a doctor's ear, now understanding for the first time the medical miracle of her survival. "The snake that bit me," she said suddenly. "It should have killed me in an hour. I survived nearly 3. The odds." "The spirits had plans for you," Ayanna said simply. "Or I'm just stubborn," Luna smiled. "I get that from both sides." They were interrupted by a commotion at the door. A young Chinese man was being refused entry despite his Harvard credentials. Without hesitation, Luna stood and walked over. "He's with our party," she said firmly, "but Miss the Establishment has policies. Then the establishment can change them or lose our business." She looked around the restaurant, raised her voice slightly. "I'm sure the Boston Globe would be interested to know that the restaurant refusing service to Harvard students is the same one hosting the mayor's dinner next week." The manager appeared flustered, and suddenly the young man was welcomed. He joined their table, introducing himself as David Chen, grandson of Mei Lin. "Grandmother sends her regards," he told them. "She's mayor of Haven, now you know. First Chinese woman mayor in America." "How is the old place?" Jack asked, homesickness in his voice. "Thriving. The school has 200 students, all mixed together like you always wanted. The railroad brought prosperity, but the town charter you wrote kept it from bringing division. There's talk of statehood for Arizona, and Haven is being held up as a model for how the new state should handle racial integration." "And resistance to that model?" Ayanna asked shrewdly. David's face darkened. "Growing. There are people who say Haven is an aberration, that it only works because it's small, isolated. They want to pass laws preventing other towns from following our example." "Then we fight," Samuel said with the passion of youth. "In the courts, in the newspapers, and Congress if necessary." "The fight never ends," Jack said quietly. "It just changes form. Your mother taught me that." After dinner, they walked through Boston Common, a family that drew stares but no longer cared. Luna walked arm in arm with her father, while Ayanna carried Sarah Small Dove, and Samuel debated constitutional law with David Chen. "I want to go back," Luna said suddenly. "After my residency, Haven needs a proper hospital, not just a clinic. I want to build it." "With what money?" Samuel asked practically. "I'll find it. There are foundations, progressive philanthropists, people who believe in what Haven represents." She looked at her parents. "Will you help?" "Always," Ayanna said. "Until my last breath," Jack added. They stopped at a pond where swan boats carried tourists in lazy circles. Sarah Small Dove wanted to ride, so they bought tickets, probably the first mixed-race family to do so, without incident, though not without attention. On the boat, as Sarah Small Dove exclaimed over the swans, and Samuel continued his legal debate with David, Luna leaned against her father's shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "The life you might have had if you'd ridden past that day," Jack thought about it, about the parallel path where he'd remained a drifting cowboy alone with his ghosts, contributing nothing, changing nothing. Every choice closes some doors and opens others. He said finally, I could have had a different life, maybe an easier one, but I couldn't have had a better one. Even with all the pain, the battles, the losses. Especially with those, they made us who we are. They made this possible. He gestured to their family, to the mixed couples now feeling brave enough to walk openly, inspired by their example. As the sun set over Boston, painting the sky in shades of hope, Ayanna began to sing softly an Apache lullaby she'd once sung to Luna, then to Samuel, now to Sarah Small Dove. Other passengers on the Swan boat fell silent, listening to the ancient melody in this modern city, watching this impossible family exist beautifully, defiantly, completely. Later in their hotel room, after the children had retired, Jack and Ayanna stood on the balcony looking out over the city lights. We've come so far from that desert, Ayanna said. Distance isn't always measured in miles. She turned to him, studied his weathered face with eyes that still held fire after all these years. Do you know what you gave me, Jack Morgan? What? Permission to live again. Not just survive, but live. To love again differently, but not less. To believe the world could change because I watched you change, watched us change together. You gave me the same, Jack said, pulling her close. You and Luna, then Samuel, now Sarah. You gave me reasons to wake up, to fight, to build. The preacher at the college today, he asked me how we made it work. A marriage built on necessity that became this. What did you tell him? That necessity is just another word for recognition. We recognized what we needed in each other, what the world needed from us together. The love came later, but the respect was always there. And now, she smiled that full smile that still made his heart skip after 20 years. Now I can't imagine any other life. You're not my second chance, Jack. You're my different path, just as valid, just as deep, just as true. They kissed then, two people in their 50s who'd found each other in their 30s, who'd built a family from fragments, a town from dreams, a future from stubborn refusal to accept limitations. A knock interrupted them. Luna entered still in her graduation robes, holding a telegram. It's from Haven, she said, her voice strange. They want me to run for territorial legislature. They say if Arizona becomes a state, they want someone who understands Haven's values in government. Jack and Ayanna exchanged glances. Their daughter, the silent child they'd saved, and who'd saved them in return, being called to shape the future of a territory, perhaps a state. What will you do? Ayanna asked. Luna looked at them, then out at the city, then back to her parents. What you taught me. Fight for what's right. Build bridges. Refuse to accept that different means less than. It'll be dangerous, Jack warned. Politics is another kind of war. Then I'll be another kind of warrior. She smiled, her father's determination mixed with her mother's grace. After all, I'm the daughter of Haven. We don't do things the easy way. Samuel appeared in the doorway, Sarah Small Dove sleepy in his arms. Whatever Luna's doing, I'm helping. That's what family does. All of us. Sarah Small Dove murmured, not really understanding, but knowing she wanted to be included. They stood together on that balcony, 5 people who represented everything America claimed to be, but struggled to become diverse, united, equal, free. Not perfect, never perfect, but trying, always trying to build something better than what they'd inherited. In the distance, a church bell tolled midnight, marking the end of one day and the beginning of another. Time moving forward, carrying them all toward futures they couldn't fully imagine but would face as they'd faced everything together. Ready to go home? Jack asked his family. After we change the world, Luna said with a grin. That might take a while, Ayanna warned. Good thing we're stubborn, Samuel added. And brave, Sarah Small Dove contributed. Jack looked at his family, this beautiful, impossible, powerful family, and felt the truth of it in his bones. They would change the world one choice at a time, one fight at a time, one love at a time. The Testament of Haven wasn't written in laws or proclamations. It was written in lives and the children who grew up seeing difference as strength, in the marriages that crossed every boundary, in the communities that chose cooperation over conflict. It was written in Luna Morgan, valedictorian and future legislator, in Samuel Morgan, who would become Arizona's first mixed-race attorney general, in Sarah Small Dove Morgan, who would one day paint murals that celebrated America's true diversity, in the thousands of children who would grow up in towns inspired by Haven's example. But most of all, it was written in a simple truth that Jack and Ayanna had discovered in the desert and proven every day since love was stronger than law, family was more than blood, and the future belonged to those brave enough to build it together. The stars above Boston were the same stars that shone over Haven, over the desert where it all began. Under their eternal light, the Morgan family stood witness to what was possible when people chose to see each other fully, to build together, rather than apart, to prove that e pluribus unum from many one could be more than a motto. It could be a life, a family, a legacy, and it was just beginning.